Hello, everyone. Good morning. We're just getting set up here. Who has been at a Unite before? Oh, that's quite a lot. For who's this the first time? Also quite a lot. Okay, so for the people who haven't been to a Unite yet, on the day one keynote, we try to sort of put up this whole flashy show with with demos and movies, and it's we try to make a show out of it. This sort of day two session is it's completely the opposite. It's going to be a very raw sort of conversation, hopefully, between the people here on stage, who are all on the Unity engineering team, and the people here in the room that want to talk to us, hopefully. The way we're going to set it up is that each of us is going to cover a certain section of the product. We're going to talk for maybe 5 minutes each, depending on, might differ a little bit. And then we're going to take questions on that topic for about 5 minutes. There's mics here in the middle of the hallways. So if you want to ask a question, please, I hope the seats are sort of far enough from each other that you can easily walk out. Line up in the mic and we'll take questions. At the very end, hopefully, if I do a good job at keeping everyone in check, we're going to end up with hopefully about 10 minutes of questions on on any topic of the product. Should I say anything else, or should we just go?
Should move to center stage.
I should do what?
Move to center stage.
Oh, I should move to center stage. Looks better. But then. Oh, yeah, because I got the first section. That is right. I got the first section. So we're going to start talking about scripting and what's going on with scripting. So if you care about it, you probably noticed that we've been hard at work at shipping C#6 and .NET 4.6. I know it's been a long wait. We appreciate your patience. There's an experimental build actually out that has the new Mono .NET 4.6 and C#6. So if you care about it, please give it a shot. It's looking pretty good. We have a few issues left related to the debugger, and I think once we fix that, and we've got enough feedback from people that says that that it doesn't break their whole project, we can take that to mainline. So this has sort of the C#6 and .NET 4.6. It's been a big it's been a big task that takes a lot of energy of the whole team. Once that is done, we want to look at the garbage collector. So a lot of things happened in .NET land. There's Mono is MIT licensed now. The .NET CLR is licensed, so it has an open license. So there's a lot of sort of .NET VM ingredients out there, and everyone is still sort of trying to figure out which pieces make most sense to which other ones. So definitely the GC that we have now, that's going away, and we're going to either plug in SGen or the Microsoft GC. And we haven't made a decision on which one yet. I think it's going to be SGen, but it's a bit too early to tell. It's a little bit it's actually a lot of work, because plugging in a new garbage collector requires us to have it's a long story, but all of our Unity code, anytime where we want to write to manage memory, and we do that all over the place. If you do that if you want to have a fast GC, you need to tell the GC about it. So a lot of the work that goes into shipping a new GC for us is going over all our code and finding all these places that do that, so that we make sure that they're all properly covered. On the area of GC, there's still quite a few APIs that we have that force you to do an allocation, or that actually force us to do an allocation, even though it really makes no sense, because if you do a regular get components call, you get the results back in an array, but you really rarely do you need to store the array. So what we're going to probably do is make get components return some kind of temp buffer, which has a much more controlled lifetime, so that it doesn't have to go on the GC heap. And hopefully with those two combined, we'll be in a much better position when it comes to how much of a pain in the ass it is to, to avoid GC spikes. The third one, oh, I'm going way too slow. The third one on the list here, script behavior. This is sort of the mono behavior 2. When we made the first mono behavior, like you could argue that we didn't quite know what we were doing, and we made a bunch of design decisions that we wish we could take back. Especially also on like the whole topic of the lifetime. Which events do you get when? And there's on awake, on destroy, on disable, and I think Richard actually, before you joined us, you made this diagram of like how it actually works, and it's scary, and it's annoying to work with, but it's impossible for us to change it without breaking all your code. So the plan right now is to make a new base class, a script behavior, and when you derive from that, if we do a good job designing it this time, your life's going to be much nicer, and then the mono behavior will still be there to make all your current scripts behave as they do today. And we're going to work on controlling which scripts go into which assembly. Right now, all the scripts that live in the assets folder, with the exception of editor and some other things, they go into one big assembly, and that means if you change one script, we have to recompile the whole thing, and that's slower than it needs to be. So it will allow you and asset store vendors to take like the scripts that belong together and make sure that those go into their own assembly, so that they don't have to be recompiled all the time as well. It's one of the, oh. And the last one we have is that we have 2 Visual Studio people here actually in the room. Hey guys. And they've been hard at work at making Visual Studio much leaner, smaller installer, and faster to start, and not have all this, all this SQL server viewer diagram stuff. I don't even know what it is, but it's in there. But it's going to go away and be a Visual Studio setup that's specifically tailored for a Unity workflow. All right, let's open the house for questions on scripting. Please, at least someone have a question.
Yeah, you have to get to the mic.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. If someone else has a question, already get to the next mic, and then we can line up.
So when you're talking about the script behavior and sort of re-envisioning something that already exists, this is something that you guys have done. I really love that you guys are kind of redesigning things that might not work the way you want it to, but what is your plan in the future for legacy support for things and deprecating them and making a leaner engine, or are those things going to stick around for eternity?
That is a good question. So one of the cool tools that we've built over the last 1.5 years, like the script updater. Basically, what it allows us to do is it allows us to change public API, and then when we load your project and it uses the old API, we can detect that and rewrite your code to now use the new API. So we've been using that a lot to sort of free us from the chains of sad public API decisions from the past. It's always a tricky topic for us because we want to, like people expect Unity to work like Photoshop. Of course you can open, a 7-year-old PSD file. Of course Unity should be able to open a 7-year-old project. And it's always a balance between, like we care a lot about backwards compatibility of the project, but we also care about not blocking ourselves from improving. And like the script updater helps with that. And each feature we do, we have to make like a custom choice of what we do, like what the best choice here is when it comes to backwards compatibility. For the script behavior, it's obvious that it needs to be a parallel one. And for other stuff, we're able to just replace. Yeah.
So for the script behavior, my question is, are you going to have the on awake and stuff be virtual functions now? And is that going to impact performance at all?
So I'm not actually, so
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not going to impact performance. And like we've prototyped, it's either going to be virtual or interface. But whatever we do, it's not going to be this magic name that you can mistype and then it doesn't work.
Okay.
And I think for unenable, that one will be virtual. But then for the ones, for instance, for physics, those might probably go through an interface. We're not like the script behavior. It's not something that's going to ship very soon because, we'll have to live with this for another decade, and we better get it right. So, we'll take the time to get it, to get it right. But it's definitely something that we care about a lot because we don't like the current one either.
On the subject of allowing things to be organized by assembly based on project structure, does that mean that functionality will be added to allow for special folders to be placed into subfolders based on the vendor for things like gizmos and editor resources that currently have to exist?
Yeah, the way it is right now, that you have to place it in a special folder, which makes it hard to sort of have your own self-contained directory for a thing that's just horrible, and we need to fix that. We're going to fix that.
Awesome.
I have a question kind of about the assemblies. If we have control over kind of designing what our assemblies are going to be, would there be more options to allow, for example, assigning what goes into assembly? For example, like T4 templates in MS Build. If you use them in Unity, they just get completely stripped out every time the solution's regenerated. So I was wondering if we get control over when the solutions get regenerated, if we're what goes into them at all.
So there's actually see the guy in the blue sweater? You should talk to that guy. But there's a callback that lets you sort of post-process the solution that we make to add stuff or remove stuff. Oh my God, we have such a big line, and I'm already running out of time. I'm gonna deal with this. Okay, let's take one more question on scripting, and we'll have some time at the end, and we're not going anywhere after this session anyway.
So a couple of years ago, you were talking about the possibility of removing the special null comparison on behaviors. Any word on that?
Yeah. So one of the things that happened with C#6 is that it has like the Elvis operator, like the question mark dot. If you squint your eyes, it looks like Elvis. And it's a very convenient operator that checks if something is null, and if it's not, then does something with it. But it doesn't respect our sort of, magic nullness. So this is, it's something that I'm talking with the C# language team about. If we, what the hell we're going to do about that? I'm pushing for having like a custom null operator being added to the C# language, but obviously I'm not the only one in charge of that, so that's going to take a few more phone calls at the very least. All right, next up is core. Joe?
All right. Yeah, I mean the first two, I'm just going to skip over them really quickly because I blew my load in the keynote already.
That's not something you can say in the US, Joe.
I'm European, it's okay. It's okay.
This isn't televised, right? I mean, it's not filmed.
Anyway, so asset pipeline job system, I think you've seen that, but yeah, I just put it up here so that you can ask questions if you want to.
Okay.
Then I think there's one really exciting thing that we're doing with graphics. I think that's probably one of the biggest steps we're doing with graphics in, I don't know, a very long time. That's a scriptable render loop. And what the scriptable render loop is all about is moving most of our high-level decision-making, all the things that define the state and in which order objects get rendered and so on, moving all of that to C#. And the basic idea is that in the C++ engine, we would like to actually not even know what a gbuffer layout is or what forward rendering means or something like that. Instead, it's all C# code that drives these really high-level decisions. So that from C# code, you could change what type of shadow maps you're using. You could implement totally new rendering techniques. You can do tile-based deferred if you want to, or whatever. And all of that can be done in C#. And we have a lot of prototypes already. In fact, we have a GitHub repo already where we have the high-level code, which we're just developing completely open source. And there, we're working on, right now, we're very focused on the high-level side. We're focused on a new HD render loop, which is a really high-end render loop where we can actually fix a lot of the old problems that we had that are pretty hard for us to actually upgrade. So, for example, our light fall-offs for point light, they're not how they should be. And for a long time, we haven't really been able to fix that because that breaks all content. But with the scripted render loop, we kind of have a new chance where we have this parallel thing that's optional, and then you can turn it on, or you can keep using the old ones. But this way, we can totally change all these old decisions that we made with our lighting pipeline and do better decisions and make it really, really extremely good-looking renderer and also significantly faster. I mean, that's maybe a bit confusing that we're moving code to C#, and as a result, it will get faster, but it's true. It's true. It's really true. It's just because, basically with the script render loop, the main thing is we move all the high-level decision-making to C#, and then you build sort of instructions what should be rendered, but none of that scales with the number of renderers. You basically just schedule these instructions that are then run in C++ code, highly optimized, and that code, because it's so much more explicit, we can optimize the hell out of. And so I think it's going to be really, really awesome. And it allows us to experiment much, much more than we do today. And it will let you rewrite our rendering pipeline from scratch if that's what you want, and experiment. And then, I mean, a lot of things we're doing now are basically moving sort of a level down, basically from, let's say, for example, the AI system, right? We have a NavMesh agent component, and we would like the NavMesh agent component to actually live in C#, because those are very much things where you want control, you really want to rewrite it a bit and fit it more with the animation system or whatever other systems you have. And so a lot of these things like the scripted render loop, AI, a lot of components, we move more stuff into C#. And then the question, of course, becomes how are we going to distribute that? And in Unity, we would like to work much more like people are working in the asset store. But of course, asset store doesn't have great packages. They are relatively shitty packages. There's no dependencies, there's no semantic versioning, all these things. So we are working on making package management really be built into Unity so that we can use it ourselves, and eventually we would like to expose that on the asset store as well. I think that's really powerful. I mean, I think it's maybe hard to get how big of a thing that is, but I think it will really have a huge impact. Then there's terrain. So we have some people working on terrain, and what we decided is actually that we're going to make them not work on terrain. So instead, well, actually, so the thing is this. When you look at our terrain today, terrain is basically mainly it's three things, right? There's the height map, and then there's the texturing of the height map, and then there's the trees and the vegetation. The worst part in the terrain system we have today, I think, is the vegetation and the trees and the rocks and the shrubbery and this kind of stuff. And so if we just upgraded the terrain system, I mean, it would take some time, and if we focus on just the ground and the height map part and the surface, then it would still be a bad terrain. But what we can do instead is first we're going to focus on the instancing part and the vegetation and all these things, because they're useful even if you're not using the terrain system. You can use vegetation systems on top of a mesh renderer, for example, and we really want to separate the vegetation from the actual terrain surface. So it's really a separate component, and it's just about, the problem statement is more like, how do we render, how do we efficiently store 100 million instant grass blade instances effectively and cull it and render it so we can draw 100,000 grass blades efficiently? That's more the problem we want to solve. More sort of like looking at it as a more general rendering problem as opposed to this very specialized terrain problem. And then the same with the terrain itself. I think there's a lot of techniques now. I mean, like material systems. I mean, for example, Substance Painter could be a good tool to actually paint on terrain. So generalizing a pipeline more to do sort of like much more general purpose material blending, I think is a much better choice these days than this very specialized terrain system. So, questions?
Race.
Okay, so with the job system, it's been a little unclear, but is this part of an effort to make the engine thread safe?
So the good thing is the engine is already thread safe. And it's thread safe because you cannot call anything outside the main thread. And actually, that's funny, but it's, I think, the only way to do it. I mean, if we just allowed you to call APIs all over the place from any thread you like, I mean, there's one way we could do it, which is just reduce the frame rate by 10, and then we would be fine. That would be thread safe too. But that's not realistic, right? We want performance. So in order to get performance, we need to put restrictions. And with this job system, I mean, what I didn't get into is what are those restrictions? And one of the things, for example, you cannot do in the job system is you cannot put a reference type in a job because that is inherently unsafe. There's no way we can know if you have a race condition, if you can modify your memory all over the place. Instead, we're introducing a buffer class, which acts like an array. And for that, we can do specific tracking. And we have sort of like a handle system that really gives you that safety and tells you exactly when you make mistakes. And so it's a little bit different way of coding, and it's restricted. But we can open up these sort of entry points into the engine where they matter one by one in different subsystems. Like first the transform component, because it's the most common one. But then maybe we'll do the same for animation. We could do uploading to a vertex buffer, like geometry. We could do that jobified and safely, and directly uploading into the vertex buffer memory, for example, instead of doing these 3 copies we do today. So it's more like really specialized APIs to get the performance out of it, as opposed to let's just open everything up and have the Wild West, because I don't think that's possible or can be done.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any plans to separate input from frame rate?
That's a great question. But yes, I think in the new input system there is basically at least there's an event stream, and you can get the time of every event, so you can at least do it. And it's, I mean, I do think that especially with VR, there is value in us thinking a little bit about, multi-frequency update and that kind of stuff. But we haven't really thought too much about that yet. So,
is it?
We are working on a new input system, by the way.
Yeah. Yes.
Actually, isn't there an experimental build out for that?
There is. There's.
Because we realized that's a big pain point.
Yeah.
Okay, we can take one more question on core.
Okay. So I have a question regarding the package manager. Right now on the asset store, anyone who creates an asset kind of has to include everything that asset's dependent upon in the package. And that can sometimes cause conflicts when you have some overlap, like say, for example, Facebook SDK and notification assets. So with the new package manager that you're doing, is there going to be any kind of check going on to make sure, hey, this DLL already exists in the project, I don't need a second version of it, or things of that nature?
Yes, so like what you describe is definitely is a bit like that's a big problem, our big problem. Like it's annoying. I actually don't like. I'm looking at you for the answer for this one because I'm not working on it.
Can you repeat? I didn't 100%
Okay,
get the
so
question.
to just give an example, the Facebook SDK at one time, I don't know if it still does it, it's an older project, would use DLLs that overlapped with a lot of the assets on the asset store that deal with unified notification systems for like Android and iOS. And you'd have duplicate DLLs that would cause bugs and crashes.
Got it. Okay, so yes, so I think I mean, it requires the ecosystem to really adapt it. And I think that will take some time to get there. But I think it's about that, if you use a DLL that is common and shared, that just has to be in a separate package, right? If Facebook, like basically when you have package managers, what you do is you just put that DLL in a package, and then when Facebook installs, it includes that package, and it has semantic versioning, so it will pull the right DLL version down, and it will do it automatically for you. And then everything kind of works out. But of course, if you include too many DLLs into each project, it will not work. So it requires the whole ecosystem to follow a standard. So there's a lot of work for us to really get there. And I mean, a lot of Unity has to be split up into modules. And I mean, it's a big effort, but I think talk again in a couple of years, we'll get there.
Okay, thank you.
We need to move to the next system. I feel like such a jerk for cutting off people's questions early, but we're not going anywhere after this session, so we'll really try to get through all of them. Graphics, Matt?
Hey, so luckily Joe already covered quite a lot of graphics stuff for me, so hopefully this will go kind of quickly. So in 5.4 and 5.5, we've been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes in graphics, like improvements to HDR rendering. We've implemented a lot of new file types for that. We did a lot of shader refactoring, a lot of stuff that you may not have really seen, but it's really important. We also did a lot of work on our experimental features. A lot of them are in preview, as you can see on the slide. Things like Vulkan, a progressive light mapper, and lighting consistency, which is hugely important to anyone who's been trying to use mix mode for the last couple of years. So obviously in the future, we're going to be focusing on continuing work on those, trying to get them to a shippable state where we're perfectly happy with them. And I guess trying to push a lot more features into that same experimental workflow. It seems to work pretty well for getting responses back from the community about them. And then we have a lot of stuff that's kind of out there in the future that hard to say when that stuff's going to come. A lot of it you may have seen already, like in the keynote, advancements to Metal, compute in Metal, and native shaders in Metal. We also have done a lot of work on improving mobile graphics. So we are implementing linear for mobile, finally. We have done a lot of performance improvements for mobile graphics all across the board. What else do we have? So we have a lot of stuff riding on scriptable render loops that Joe was talking about. It's going to help us do, first off, a lot of performance improvements across the board, specifically for my angle in post-processing. It's going to make a big difference to the way we handle that. And then we also have some new features that you may not have heard of, such as custom texture, which is a new type of render texture, which you can control through shaders. It's really good for stuff like caustics and ripple effects. And that's probably, I'm going to keep it short.
I think that's a pretty good list.
We're behind time.
No, you're doing good on time, but we've been short on questions all the time.
Yeah, so let's
open up for questions.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to be moving video texture capability into mobile.
Ah, that is a good question.
Where is? Yes, there he is.
Yes, guy.
Can you go to the mic?
Convenient.
Okay. So if you paid attention in the keynote yesterday, a new video player has been introduced. So this is a new component that makes it possible, yes, to address Android, iOS, WebGL, Windows, Mac, and many platforms in the future. So yes, this is right now in trunk.
What is the timeline for us shipping that? Do we know?
5.6.
5.6, new video player. Unless the beta users tell us it's not working. But that won't happen, right? Yeah.
So 2 limits that I ran into when using all the latest shaders from Uber and real-time terrain and stuff, or relief terrain pack, is 128 shader keyword, and I know 5.5 raises it to 256, which will be a brief reprieve, but I'm sure there'll be more things to fill that up. And the second is layers got filled up. So if you use UFPS and a few other things, you hit 32 layers because they're using both physics and rendering in the same thing that's limited to 32 also. So there was someone on the forums who tried to make a tool to like help you like prune your keywords that were like actually just old ones. Do you guys have a plan to help us limit our keywords better, or are you going to get rid of the limit further beyond 256, and is layers going to get fixed?
Right. There is so on the material keywords, I think there was a plan basically to separate the keywords that you put on the material from the keywords that you have globally. And what that allows is that the material keywords are only for that shader. So that will make it actually scale. So we don't have to, you know, like in a year stand here and increase it to 512. Because, yeah. So that will solve that, I think, in the best way.
Do we have thoughts on layers?
Layers, I don't know. Does anyone have an idea how to solve it?
Yeah,
open the floor to suggestions.
Yeah, so if anyone has a good idea of what we should do with layers, please come see us, because we could use one. So yeah, we don't have a good answer on the layers right now.
Okay, I noticed tags work differently, and when you import like 2 different asset packages, they can add their tags as basically strings, whereas the layers stay bound to integers. You have to reassign them and like do shuffling. So my biggest pet peeve with anything that's like a complete project, like UFPS has 8 layers. So to bring it into my existing project, I had to go in and reassign a whole bunch of mine. Could complete projects and the way the project settings as a whole, all of the project settings aren't diffable, right? There's no way to like pull in this complete project and that complete project and have the layers play nice. You just have to like carefully not overwrite yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see the problem, but
there is. I mean, we did. So we did actually. I think it was like 1.5 years ago. We had an initiative where we did like a unified layer framework, where basically we unified static flags and layer mask and tags into one thing, and then globally, and then it would be string based, and it would be inherited also in the hierarchy, and it was string based with adding and removing. And that project died under its own weight because it tried to do too much at once, and we were confused about what it really solves, and then I don't know. So we need to get back to that, and it's hard to really solve it 100, you know, like all the use cases, but I mean you're right that it's definitely a problem worth solving.
Next question.
Hey, I'm an artist coming from a more, I guess, traditional rendering system like 3ds Max and Corona and Mental Ray. Seeing some of the talks from like the Atom demo, the way they sort of rewrote the shadows, the rendering, the ambient occlusion, can you say anything about sort of making it maybe more streamlined, or what the plans are for maybe giving, I don't know how to phrase it, maybe like giving some flexibility or some of the options for having maybe more control or more, I don't know, you know, I understand there are different challenges when making a system that can do a lot of things, but from my point of view of like, you know, does that make sense of like?
Totally, totally. So that is what the scripted render loop is all about. I mean, I probably missed. I now realize I didn't say the most important thing. about it. And the most important thing is that we will actually, the render loops that we write and what it allows us to write is render loops that are more purposeful towards a thing you make. So we'll have an HD render loop, and the target of that is to make a great render loop for consoles and PC. And then maybe we will make a low-end mobile render loop. And that will have totally different restrictions. But what it means is because they are different render loops and because that low-end mobile render loop, maybe we will not even support PBR on it. You will just have to make diffuse textures, right? And so by doing that, we can then say, cool, so the HD render loop, we're going to require compute on that. And then we're going to really push hard on making something that is really for high-end. And for the low-end, we still have something that's really optimized for that. And maybe you have to create your assets a little bit differently, but when you create your project, you can make a choice of what you want to target. And anything in between with the scripted render loop, you can create the render loop completely yourself. So you will be able to implement practically any real-time rendering technique. If you want to change how you do shadows, all of that code will be written in C# and shader code. And we'll ship the source of how we do it, but you can go in and just tweak it. So it's really about opening the hood for the rendering pipeline.
All right, we're going to move to the next section, which is 2D.
Yo. OK, so disclaimer, I'm not actually on the 2D team, but I had a quick chat with them to kind of get an update to bring to you guys. So first things first, in 5.5, the beta that's already out now, we've got Capsule Collider 2D and some improvements to the 2D physics system. I think the way that we generate contacts or something like that has been improved to be more stable. And then in 5.6, code that's landing at the moment, so we've got sorting groups, which allow you to, say you've got a character made of multiple sprites, you can make sure that they're all kind of treated as a single unit when it comes to sorting with other objects in the scene, while still having kind of the parts of that character be sorted relative to each other as well. So this solves a bunch of problems people have had with like multi-sprite characters. Then like the leg is behind some other sprite on the scene, but then the hand is in front of it and stuff like that. We're doing axis distance sort, which is the ability to do the sorting based on things like the vertical position. So you can get that kind of classic, like the further up the screen it is, the further back it goes. We're bringing editors for outlines and physics shape, so you can really control exactly what the tight mesh looks like for your sprites and exactly how the colliders are going to be generated. And we have 9-slice sprites that are coming in 5.6 as well, which should be good. Next slide, please, Lucas. Yeah. So those are the things that are kind of in mainline and coming in mainline shortly. At the same time, we also have 2D features in preview. So preview 2 is currently out. It's been out for, I think, a couple of months at this point. And the particular focus on that at the moment is the tile mapping support that you may have seen people demoing before. A full Atlas API and control over sort of Atlas assets, so you can really kind of, rather than the sprite atlasing being something that just kind of happens behind the scenes, it's something you can really kind of get at it if you really want to kind of find out what's on this atlas and that sort of thing. And sprite masks, so masking stuff with sprites. Name says it all. Preview 3 is due in a few weeks. The team are really just kind of trying to bring the code up to date with our current trunk, I think. So yeah, something will ship by the end of the year based on 5.6 with updates and the next iteration of some of these features. The bad news is that Smart Sprite that I know a lot of people are waiting for, that's still in like big time refactoring. But the hope is that the team will be able to kind of really heavily focus on that Q1 next year. So we have to wait a little longer for that, unfortunately, but hopefully the other features will save you guys some time and pain in the meantime. So that's 2D. I also had a quick chat with the AI team. So they have now available, as of a few days ago, so you guys may not have heard of this, a feature preview build of the new navigation baking functionality. So this is a complete kind of massive refactor and change of the way NavMesh is baked inside Unity. It's no longer this kind of like you just flag a bunch of things and then bake and you get a single nav mesh, and it doesn't support streaming and it's completely inflexible and so on. The new thing is much more flexible and much more exposed in the level of control you have over it, both at a high level and a low level. So the first thing that it's going to let you do is you have multiple agent sizes. And that's actually going to work by you being able to bake multiple nav meshes on the same scene for different sizes of agents. So you have one for your tank and one for your people and one for your mice or whatever. It has a component-based workflow, so you're actually attaching like nav mesh surface components to things and then sort of saying, okay, like all the children of this, all the render meshes of all the children of this should be treated as solid for this. So you get a lot more control over that, and you can add in, I think we've got components as well that let you control like the flags applied to the mesh and the way carving is done and stuff like that. We support runtime nav mesh baking now. So that's obviously going to help a lot of people building procedural games. Any kind of like carving the nav mesh at runtime, you can now just change the geometry around and just rebake that tile. I've also seen demos from the AI team of like walking over a massive terrain and just baking the nav mesh as you go, kind of like in a sort of 10 tile radius around the player, and just throwing away old tiles, baking new ones as you go around. So you can have a lot of kind of like dynamic control over this stuff.
Hey, that preview build, that's available today?
Yes.
For the AI stuff?
Yes. Yes.
I think we have some guys over there that want to try it.
Yes. I think we have a lot of people over here who want to try it. And all of this stuff is built on top of a new low-level baking API. So all the components and so on, they're all in C#. The source code is available today on GitHub. And it's all built on top of a low-level baking API, which is implemented in C++, which gives you a lot of control over, like, you can just pass it a list of meshes and transforms and primitives and so on, and it will bake based on that. So you can hand it whatever you like and bake nav mesh based on that. So that all works. Next slide, please. Right, so after the stuff that's available today in the preview build, what are the AI team thinking about doing next? So first problem that I was talking to them about, moving platforms. And just dealing with making sure that agents kind of move with the platform and they understand that they're still in the same place on the nav mesh and that kind of thing. You can do some stuff with this just using like the runtime rebaking or making the nav mesh surface kind of move with the platform itself. But there can be some problems where like the agents lose track of their paths and so on. So even what we have today may work for some situations, but it's got some constraints. We want to kind of take the constraints away so you can really just have stuff moving around and have it all work completely fine. Secondly, as Joe mentioned, we're going to port the nav mesh agent to C# and open source it. So you guys will be able to get a lot more control over exactly how the agent behaves. And one of the things this is going to force us to do is to make sure that, again, we have a low-level API that we can build that on top of, which is, again, going to kind of build a lot of flexibility in there. So we're going to make sure that we have the right low-level APIs for doing a path query, updating a path query, and things like that. So it's going to be good for us in terms of like what it makes us do to the design of the system, and then it's going to be good for you guys that you can completely customize exactly how the agent's going to work on top of that. And then the other major thing that they want to get done pretty soon is to just kind of go through, do a lot of refactoring, and a lot of kind of bringing of the code up to like the modern standard of what code inside Unity should be like. So all the jobification stuff, making sure that these things can be done, exposed to the C# job system, moving as much as possible off the main thread in the C++ side of things, and just generally kind of preparing everything for like the whole next generation of all of this stuff, so that everything is like faster and better for us to work on, and more stable and more reliable, so we get a better quality result. So that's AI. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to mention to you guys today is the build report. No, this is actually the last slide.
This isn't the last slide. Are you kidding me?
Last slide. So this is something that I have been working on, and I can answer questions about. We realized a while ago that we dumped some information out into the editor log file at the end of a build process. Most people don't know it's there. People can find it. There's some tools that have been written on top that parse it and so on, but really it's pretty weak when it comes to trying to understand what's in your build and why, and what happened during the build process and stuff like that. So we have work in progress, and this is just a mock-up that I'm showing on screen here, although the work in progress actual live version doesn't look too far away from it now. The idea is that after every build, we're going to throw this up at you, and you can get like a full breakdown of like where the time went, where the space has gone, which assets are in there, and then also extend it for platform-specific things, like, for example, on WebGL, which code modules in the engine were included in the build, and why they were included as well. So you can find that one scene that has a box collider that pulled in the entire physics engine, and things like that. So yeah, got a couple of minutes for questions.
Richard.
Hey.
Is there any plans to change the nav mesh baking from render meshes to physics meshes?
So the new nav mesh bake API will let you pick what you want, and if you want to mix and match, you can do that too. Like the low-level bake API, you just feed in whatever you want.
Perfect. The other question I was going to ask is there plans to change the fixed Y up so that you can use it in 2D?
Yes, the nav mesh surface can have whatever orientation you like. It was one of the first things I did with it was try to make like Alien, with it running around walls and so on. It can, transitioning from orientation can be a little awkward, but yeah, you can have things running around on walls and it's fine.
Excellent, thank you.
What are the chances of that build report being accessible in Cloud Build?
100%. So actually, one of the things we're doing here, we're deliberately building it using, we're building the user interface using web technology so that we can actually embed exactly the same UI inside Cloud Build. So the intention we want here is that you have one report UI that you've learned how to use and learned how to read, and you don't have to care whether the report you did was done locally or done in the cloud or whatever. It's all just the same UI, and it just works. So.
First question, is the nav mesh system going to be teamed up with like a behavior tree or something else? Because there's really good ones in the asset store, and I like the competitive ones in the asset store, but I'm just curious.
Right. So at the moment, there's nothing specific on the roadmap from the core AI team in R&D for behavioral stuff. There is various things being kicked around in like Unity Labs, which is our slightly longer-term research stuff, but there's nothing they want to share about that yet, as I understand it.
Okay. And the second question is kind of gets into the idea of like the separation between the open source components you have. People are then able to modify those like you did with the input system for UI. So suppose that there's an asset package that a lot of people are building characters off of in the asset store. Right now, if I make a package on the asset store like a character, I can include animations, but it's hard to put any AI onto it. There's very few drag and drop characters that a beginner can get working in their game.
Right.
And part of that is because the dependencies between like this package that you'd have to buy or maybe a free version of it and that package are just separate things.
Sure.
So is there any plan in like the stuff you guys are doing with assemblies and packages and whatever to make it easier to have one package which like for an AI for a character then just calls in the new package system that other package which is the fairly popular but not built into Unity necessarily AI package?
So what you're talking about is dependencies between packages, Yes. Yes, that is on the roadmap.
Last question over there.
Yeah, and about the build system. If you have customized one of the open source projects like the UI system or whatever, currently you have to copy that into the installation directory to be able to use it, and that really complicates build system as well.
Yes.
Is that going to be addressed?
Yes. We don't know exactly how yet, but
yeah.
Oh, you do know exactly how. Okay. Yeah.
Well, that's the package manager. That's the purpose of the package manager. I mean, the UI system is built in a really weird way today because we don't have the package manager yet. But all of these systems, the way we distribute them now is we just put them on GitHub and we pretend and hope there will be a package manager soon. And until then, we're just going to work ourselves like you do in the asset store, basically. You just take the code into the project folder. But then eventually, when the package manager ships, that same GitHub repo, we're basically going to, what I would love to be able to do is basically link directly from an artifact file in your project to a GitHub revision number. That, I think, would be an awesome workflow.
Okay. So that'll allow you to use any of those customized things in, for example, Cloud Build and things like that.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right, next section is Playables. Dom?
Hi. So Playables, it's a for.
Does anyone know what a playable is?
Okay, 2 hands. Good. Awesome. So it's a powerful toolkit to manipulate animation and audio. Soon, also with the new video player, it's going to also be able to manipulate video. So basically, it's it's an API, C# API, that allows you to organize blend trees of animation, blend trees of audio, that includes DSPs and that kind of stuff, on which you can build tools such as behavior trees, I just heard about, or the timeline that you've seen in the keynote. So it's all dynamic, so a graph can actually spawn dynamically at runtime new branches. So that means that you could have, for instance, an animation tree that spawns a graph that plays the state machine for a little while and then kind of spawns another branch that blends to another state machine. So you can do very powerful stuff like that. You can blend easily from gameplay to timelines, so to do quick time events, that kind of stuff. It's going to be included in the 5.6 build. It's going to ship with 5.6 in the experimental namespace. So that's it. I don't have more information than that.
So the playables that's also like what is used by the timeline, right? All the clips in the timeline that we showed yesterday.
Right. So we have a breakout session a little bit later today at 3 that's going to explain how we built the timeline. The timeline is essentially built on this graph API, and we're going to get into details. And it's extensible. Essentially, you can build custom playables that will be spawned by the timeline using this graph API. Do you have any questions?
Then we're moving to WebGL.
So what are we doing on WebGL? Okay. So yeah, first about the kind of immediate steps in 5.5. We are adding, so we have been working on getting the build size down. So we are allowing you to choose Broadly compression instead of gzip, as Broadly is now natively supported by several browsers. And for those who don't support it, we have a JavaScript fallback. And we have been improving our stripping to be able to strip more code from the build. So how much you gain from this kind of depends on your code and your assets, but we've seen gains of around 30% compared to 5.4 for many projects. So that's how much your build gets smaller. We are enabling WebGL 2 by default because we'll see both Chrome and Firefox actually enabling support in their release builds very soon. So that will happen within the 5.5 timeframe. You'll be able to have stack traces with symbols in release builds because we'll just include a symbols file which can be downloaded on demand when you run into a crash. And because we know that iteration times on WebGL are a big problem right now, just waiting for your build, we're now also caching the link result. So if you're just iterating on some assets, just change the texture and you rebuild, the build actually just takes like 20 seconds or so. And so that helps a lot with iteration times. That's 5.5. In 5.6, what we'll have is a new embedding API for putting your WebGL content on a page. So you can you no longer have to use our templates or copy code out of our templates. We just have a simple JavaScript API where you can have a single function call which puts a WebGL player onto your page. You can also put multiple players onto your page if you want. And it makes it much easier to integrate WebGL content onto any existing page or to interact with it. Also in 5.6, as announced yesterday, is the Facebook integration. Because as we're seeing a lot of people publishing with WebGL, they want to publish to Facebook. And then now you'll have like all the integration with the Facebook SDKs that's all built in, and you can even upload your builds straight from the Unity editor. Can you switch to the next slide? Then kind of with less certain release timelines, we'll have WebAssembly. Actually, the shared array buffers and SIMD should also come on that point. WebAssembly is a binary format for distributing code on the web, which allows a smaller code distribution, which can be much more efficiently parsed and compiled than JavaScript code. So you'll have faster startup times and also much more consistent and, in most cases, also significantly faster execution performance of code. While we're still kind of waiting for the browsers to finalize the specs and to ship support, I think that will happen soon. So I expect that we will have WebAssembly in some form in 5.6 as well. But that might likely still be a preview version, depending on where browsers are when we ship 5.6. Yeah, WebAssembly will be followed by shared array buffers and SIMD, which will kind of be in the future versions of the spec, which will allow multi-threaded and SIMD code. So that will help quite a lot to minimize the performance gap we are seeing between WebGL and native. And another thing we're looking at and following with a lot of interest is WebVR, which allows you to build VR content and run that on the web. So we have an experimental build internally of that. We have a working prototype. I think we'll still have to see when we ship it, because the spec is also very much still evolving. So I think it's also likely that we would ship at some point a preview build which allows you to experiment with this while we wait for the spec to finalize from the browsers. So yeah, any questions? Oh, maybe I'll take away the first one because I know it's going to come up. WebGL on mobile, that's always a common question. I can't give you a date when that will happen for two reasons. One is kind of the problems we're facing with WebGL on desktop, we have the same problems in terms of performance, in terms of memory, in terms of startup times on mobile. Just that the set limits, the constraints are much tighter. And likewise, we are waiting for external technologies for the browsers to evolve, also for the hardware to evolve to fix these issues. So it's kind of hard for us to predict when this will happen. But also, it's very hard to pinpoint a day to say, yeah, yesterday WebGL on mobile didn't work. Today it all works, because it's not going to be like that, because all the progress is very gradual. So for some things, it already works pretty well today. But it's not enough that we're confident to say it just works. So, yeah.
So about WebAssembly and the package manager, some of the things that I heard you say in your previous mention of the package manager made me think that it was connected to possibly how WebAssembly works, in the sense that, like, right now we have asset bundles. So if I wanted a game and I wanted to put some code into it while it's already running, I would have my asset bundle and then load it up through www. But if, let's say I have a Unity game in WebGL, and I want to have new content get loaded onto it, will I be able to use WebAssembly to basically have, like, say 3 different games share a bunch of assets in, like, the way the import pipeline is supposed to be able to share assets? You don't have to re-import them. Is it a similar premise to what we're supposed to be able to do with WebAssembly?
I think WebAssembly is about distributing code, so that's not really related to any problems we're solving with asset bundles, because we don't ship code in asset bundles. And the package manager, that's also about dealing with DLLs and dealing with code. So I think those are pretty separate. But I mean, one thing we will look more into is giving you more control over which code is included in a build. So as a first step, we'll see the build report, which Richard has mentioned, which gives you a breakdown also of which parts of Unity, which modules of Unity are used in your build, how much space they use, and why they were included. So you can see, there was a collider in this scene, and that's why I have all of the 3D physics engine in my 2D game. So that allows you to optimize for that. One thing I want to do in the future is to work on having more control, that you can actually, when you make your project, you can say, I want no 3D physics in this project, and then that the editor would actively constrain you from it. But I guess that's kind of running away from your question.
Yeah, so some of us have put code into into asset bundles as strings, and then once they get there, then
Yeah,
we turn them into bytes, and then we load them as
But this is
assemblies.
not going to be possible on WebGL
'Cause
or
AOT.
on any IL2CPP platforms because those are IoT, and that's not.
That's
gonna
my
change.
last question.
Yeah.
Is there any possibility to make something that would be loadable as like a modular WebAssembly for the web version
You
that could do the AOT?
You could package some JavaScript code and interact with that, but then you'd have to build your own kind of marshalling to talk to that. And
So there's no like open source version of the IL2CPP AOT stuff that could be put out onto the runtime?
Well, there are plans to make IL2CPP open source, I think. Or are they? Lucas?
We talked about it.
Okay, but this is probably not going to help with loading code at runtime, and it would also not be feasible to have the whole tool chain and all the compiler run at runtime.
Thanks.
IL2CPP, IL2CPP.
I was just wondering,
they already did that.
when I build for mobile, I can put things into resources, so they're not consuming memory, at runtime until needed. For WebGL, I have to put those into streaming assets, but those two things work very differently. And since we build for both, mobile and WebGL, I was wondering, is there some way to have kind of a happy medium between there, so I can get the capabilities of putting something in resources, so it's already built for that platform and ready to go.
But why don't you use resources for WebGL then?
My understanding was that the resource is still downloaded with in the initial download.
Yes,
so
yes, that's true. So I think what you want to do is use asset bundles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Okay. So I guess next topic then.
VR.
Yeah, I didn't get my slides in. I'm representing Scott Flynn, who's our development director for our VR teams. He's out of Seattle, so I'm just relaying some notes. You can shoot the messenger, though. So some of the things that are being done in VR, of course, are the single pass. That'll continue to be maintained and improved. We've hired a lot of new people into our VR team. And so each of these areas gets a little more attention now. Also on Android, we have multi-view coming. So the plan for that is on 5.6. That's getting that single pass running on Android. Some of you, if you've worked directly with the Oculus SDK, they have that in there. So yeah, and then internally for us, we're improving our unit and integration tests so that at least on the VR front, it's very hard to QA that. So we're working at finding the best ways to build tests around that. And then with the scriptable render loop stuff that's coming, we're looking to have that also have a VR scriptable render loop to make use of that. That's, of course, dependent on that, so a little bit far off. Do we announce when the render loops are coming?
But I mean, the current plan is to, in 5.6, to put it in the experimental namespace, the low-level API.
Okay.
And the high-level code is in GitHub. And so if you wanted to, you could plug it into your project around the time when 5.6 ships. But of course, it's will still change things quite dramatically. And if you use it, will break your projects probably.
Would you expect?
But that means if you really want to be on the forefront, you can be. And then, I don't know.
Do we expect many VR titles to write a render loop specific to their own VR title?
Definitely. I mean, that's super important because you really want things to be quite different for VR. And there's a lot of different rules and post-processing and how you do things. So definitely, it's very important. And that's actually one of the things that the script render loop is going to be really good at, just making something really dedicated for a purpose.
And this is a separate item, but I think it would probably, it will tie into the scriptable render loop. So monoscopic rendering, obviously for things in the distance, in the near field you want stereo rendering, but for things in the distance you can kind of get away with monoscopic. So, building that into having that be a part of the new scriptable render loop, that would be an optimization. And then we announced this earlier in the year, the GameWorks VR integration and also Liquid VR integration. So we have been working with both AMD and NVIDIA. We have some of their stuff in partner branches. It's just taking some time to integrate, in the Unity way into our code base. There is still no release date on those. Of course, DX12 and Vulkan, that's separate. I was on the graphics side. Multi-layer support. Not quite sure what that is. That's coming in 5.7. It says, I don't know if that has anything to do with the layer question. Probably not. Platform-specific compositors in a generic way. Yeah, I don't.
What about the editor VR stuff you showed at the keynotes? Like,
I can
when are you gonna
speak
ship that?
to a little bit about. We're making use of our input team's input system. So very much trying to have VR needs represented in our new input system that we're building. And we had a summit earlier this year. So trying to figure out how to also expose haptic support. We're making use of an editor VR. So
Well, can I ask a question? Like, who here thinks they would use editor VR tools in their workflow?
Oh. Cool.
Do we have a ship date for that?
We announced it's December. So
December?
It'll be out next month. And then the final one on here is stereo cameras. And that would be a 5.7 feature. Support for rendering stereo textures.
Any VR questions?
So, what about streaming the imagery to the VR hardware so that you can do computation on a heavier platform than usually you can carry around on your head?
So I think Quark VR is a company they're playing around with that. You're kind of talking about like having a Unity remote for VR. At our Hack Week, we have done some experiments with that. The big thing with that is the latency. If you've tried any of these things, we're already just still trying to get 90 frames per second on VR devices. It's fun to experiment with, and I think, it's still in an experimental phase. So we have done a Hack Week project earlier this year where we played around with that, but, I think the tech still has to, there are so many issues to solve that would make that happen.
Are you planning on doing changes to the physics system for VR? I know that's the number one. We're CPU bound. Like, we can figure out how to fix rendering, but we can't figure out, the physics is a black box. Right?
Yeah.
There's only so much we can do.
Yeah, obviously, the physics system, what most people are doing is scaling the hell out of it so that they can get good precision on that. One of the issues, too, is that VR is currently being seen as a platform, so it's not all of our across R&D, does everyone have an HMD? So our physics team, is kind of relying on the VR team to, and from the community to know what things are important to fix, because there are other things they have on their plate. And I think as we integrate more of the VR across, horizontally across all the different functionalities of the engine, then we'll start to see some of those problems addressed. But it has been discussed. We're aware of it, and we want to find a good solution for that.
Yeah, might be worth noting as well. I think in 5.5 or possibly 5.6, we have shipped or are shipping like physics debug visualization tools as well. So we're starting to build up some stuff to really help you understand, make it a bit less of a black box, so you can kind of understand the simulation and try and optimize it that way as well.
Thank you.
Is there any plans to support ads in VR, stereoscopic view of Unity ads?
It's on our mind.
Do you want to answer? Do you have an answer? Oh.
I can tell you that we have multiple groups that are working on some concepts. I'm involved with one that is using the video player in 3D ads, and that renders potentially in VR. we're thinking about it.
I mean, I'm going to wait a month and see the actual result of the VR editor. So I would like to know, though, you're implementing it, you said open source, and traditionally the editing stuff, that's a separate namespace from the runtime stuff. But a lot of the stuff that you do in Editor VR looks like a runtime. But I assume it's running like just in the editor loop without hitting play.
Yeah, so our talk is going to be at 11:30, and we'll go into more specifics about, yeah, I think it's 11:30. We'll go into more specifics about how it's going to be released, but I'll say it's going to be an experimental build at first because we depend on some of the, we're making some changes to the editor side, but they're very minimal. So I'm only exposing what's absolutely necessary in order to have Editor VR work. So even the view itself is I mean, that's C# code, and only a few small changes were made to the actual engine and editor to support that. So it's really just building a layer on top of a few low-level things in the editor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm wondering is when we currently try to do editor plugins, some things are kind of hard to get at, and we have to do weird reflection and like IL spy things to try to find out what the editor is doing. But with the new C# editor code for VR, with that one, it's all going to be available to us. So however you're doing the hierarchy and all those things in the VR context, we'd be able to pull that and manipulate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, next section. Build pipeline asset bundles.
So hi. So I think the most important thing to know about build pipeline and asset bundles is that Unity is building up a new team to handle this this part of the engine in Austin, Texas. So and I'm leading that team. So we've made good progress in getting that team started. And kind of our immediate concerns are actually around asset bundles. But first, for the build pipeline, you heard in the keynote some of these new publishing targets like Xiaomi and Vuforia, so we're working on supporting those. But for asset bundles, kind of our first task is to like really take a look at the build pipeline. A lot of the bugs and problems and limitations kind of are rooted in the build pipeline itself and how it works. So I mean, you've heard a lot of people talk today about this open source model and using packages and building things in C#. So we're taking the same approach with the asset bundle build pipeline and eventually the player build pipeline, where we're basically going to re-implement the whole pipeline in C# and just have a few very fundamental low-level APIs that will be exposed in the editor. But the build pipeline itself is going to be completely refactored and very, very staged, very data-oriented, and done in a way where you're going to be able to customize it however you want to. And it's going to fix a lot of just strange problems like having to do with stripping and dependencies and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we're starting. And then we're also adding some editor tooling around asset bundles. There's really nothing right now to help you understand like what's in a bundle and and to help you manage that. So we've got some tools in the works for helping you work with asset bundles. You can go to the next slide.
Oh, here you go. I'm done with that.
I just won. Just one. And then we actually have there's another team also helping with load time and performance improvements around asset bundles, particularly on some of the mobile platforms like Android, where there are some like real big problems. And then for us, after we get the build pipeline kind of refactored and in a really good state, we're going to be building on top of that, again in C# and again in this kind of open source model, a new high-level API. And part of that is going to be to help you improve your iteration times with hot reloading. So you'll be able to basically just make changes in the editor. It'll automatically rebuild bundles and send callbacks to your game or whatever, and you can choose what to do with those callbacks, whether reloading a scene or just swapping out content in real time. So working locally is just going to be super fast. And then we're also going to plug into some of the current load systems like resources.load and scene manager. So you can kind of seamlessly work with assets from asset bundles the same way you do with resources.load and with loading scenes. And then finally, with kind of the new build pipeline and this new high-level API, we're gonna add ref counting and auto unloading to help you manage memory in a very streamlined way. And again, it's a system that it'll be exposed to you, and you can build on top of. You can modify however you want. I've got a session tomorrow at 1 o'clock where I'm going to go into a little more detail. And also, if you're not familiar with asset bundles, I'm going to briefly talk about what they are and why you should use them. So yeah, if you want to know more, I encourage you to come by and check it out.
Questions?
So you're going to do anything to make building universal Windows platform projects easier? At the moment, you have to build a project that might have some stuff that you've customized in that, and then you have to go out to Visual Studio to build the actual packages. Scripting that can be a real pain.
Yeah. So I can't really speak to the specific platform. My team's mainly focused on kind of the general build pipeline. So I think in the future, some of that will be addressed, but I don't know if any of you guys can.
We have our UWP developer here.
Oh, there we go.
Can you stand up, talk to us?
Yeah. By paying, I guess you mean the different scripting backend? Is that what you're talking about? When you say it's a pain to build for it?
Sorry, so basically when you build for UWP, it builds an entire Visual Studio project subdirectory that you then have to kick off a Visual Studio build to run, to build the actual final app.
So the problem is that there's an extra manual step, right? Is that the problem?
Actually, no. I'm using the directory.
You know, I think you two should go and have a coffee.
I'll be at Ask the Expert, so you can come and chat with me.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're opening the house for questions on any topic, by the way, because I haven't forgotten anyone, right? Yeah. So until they kick us out, we're here to answer questions about whatever you want to ask us about.
Do you want to put up the next slide, Lucas?
So quick question regarding the versioning of the asset bundle. Currently, every time you update Unity, bundles are not backward compatible. Will it be possible to be able to target a certain version? So even if we update Unity, let's say, okay, I want to bundle those bundles for that version, so 5.4.3, even though we are at like 5.4.5, something like that?
No. The longer answer is the reason we really don't want that is because it very severely restricts us in what we can do about loading performance. And so rather than really getting better at player backwards compatibility of asset bundles, I mean, longer term, I think it's much smarter for us to get much better at delta patching, for example, and just make that really work really well, and make sure that our build process is completely deterministic, so that the delta patching is going to be of a very high quality, because that way you get fast load time, like fast, relatively small delta downloads. Even if you have a big texture, maybe we add an int, a new format or something. And then it's just a tiny thing that changes when you download, and the load time is good as well.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question about the build pipeline. This may have been covered and I might have just missed it, but I have the unenviable job of making an asset store asset integrate with a third-party asset that is not inside of Unity, Wise, for instance. And trying to figure out when the build changes, for what platform targeting, we have to change some of the stuff based on when that happens, and when the third-party asset is also ready to be adjusted. So the best timing for that would be right when someone says build, and I'd love a callback that said, hey.
Yeah. So one of the things we do want to do is make the build button just a callback. Yeah. So you can do whatever you want, and then we'll have our own default, build pipeline.
Don't we have a callback for that?
We have post-process and pre-process, but the thing is, sometimes it's better if you are actually in charge of the whole thing.
Yeah. And right now, I mean, it also makes sense that we build asset bundles at the same time in a lot of cases, so that will be part of our implementation. But yes, there will be a place for that.
Great. Thank you.
On the right?
The multiplayer team has done some really, really cool stuff with mono.csl, post-processing your script assemblies. Are there any plans to integrate that in a... I think I've seen some stuff on the forums, but is that something that's going to be coming mainstream so that we can hook into our own post-processing tricks and do our own cool post-processing of assemblies?
So that is a good question. So I'm not sure if we have a callback today that lets you sort of like cessel away at the assemblies before we take them. We don't have that? No? So, Stefan, that would be a good one to have in the new build pipeline.
Yes.
Well, just to clarify, also in the editor.
I mean, I guess at some point we will do Roslyn, right? I mean, that would be...
At some point what?
At some point we'll upgrade to Roslyn, and that would be really the best place to expose it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess you could do it on the AST level, but you could still want to do it on IL as well. So duly noted. Duly noted.
Yes. Thank you.
The Cecil author is the sir here in the blue shirt, by the way. You can buy him a coffee. Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question particularly with the build pipeline and switching build targets. When you switch build targets, let's say you're switching from OS X to Windows, it will default to the 32-bit architecture, even if you were targeting 64-bit, which means that if you switch platforms and you want to switch your architecture back to 64-bit, you have to re-import twice.
Yeah.
Are you guys thinking of possibly keeping that sort of architecture target so you don't have to import twice at any point? Or
that sounds really like a bad.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bug in the platform switching, but apart from that, longer term, the problem will go completely away with the new asset import pipeline because we will correctly declare all the exact dependencies, and hence switch. I mean, and also switching platforms will be a no-app. Basically, it's just like dependencies change all the time, and one of the dependencies is the target platform, and it just does on-demand switching
And shorter term in 5.5.
Yeah, we're removing the 32-bit player, right? On OS X or not?
Maybe, but yeah. But also in 5.5, we're adding an option to the cache server preferences to just always run a cache server locally to fix re-import times for just local work on switching platforms.
Okay. Yeah. Over there.
I had a question that concerns scripting again, which you kind of hit on earlier about not being able to call stuff not from the main thread. I've used some other IDEs like Xamarin Studio, which has begin invoke on main thread, which I'll use when some thread completes, and I don't really care if it takes a whole second or 2 seconds for it to happen. I just want to be able to invoke on main thread. But in Unity right now, what I have to do is in an update loop, check a Boolean that I'll change from that thread. And I have to check that every single frame to see if it's changed, and then only enact that thing. So is there any plan to add some kind of queue for the main thread of some lambdas or actions that I want to queue up to execute?
That is a good question. So we'll need to make that anyway when, so C#6 has async, so you can do.
That's what I was thinking about when this came up.
So you can do await, and like if you do an await from the main thread, you really want that callback to come back to the main thread as well, and not on some worker thread where suddenly you cannot do anything. So we'll have to make like our own, what's it called, JB? Synchronization context. So I think it's called synchronization context. That basically, and then we basically have to do what you just described. Like before, somewhere in our player loop, we have to see if there's any lambdas left to run. So if we have that anyway, we might as well add a public API for you to stuff your own lambdas in there as well.
It kind of as a follow-up to what you're just saying, if we're using task.run with C#6 and the .NET 4.6, how will that kind of relate or compare to a start coroutine and how that works now? So task.run basically just a really easy API to start up a new thread.
Right, so like all that stuff works, but you cannot call a lot of Unity API from a different thread. So if you want to do task.run and do your own C#y things and not talk to Unity so much, that's great. But if you want to, if you want to write to a transform component or call Unity API, then it's not, then it's not that useful.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, a couple questions regarding particle systems and the canvas also, specifically particle systems and the canvas. I've heard a lot of apocryphal things about maybe someday we'll be able to sort particle systems inside of the canvas.
Ooh, I'm looking to the right. I don't. It's an unlucky question because we don't have anyone from our particle system team. Oh, hey, we do have someone from 2D. Hey. No, sorry, from UI. Yeah, we have a mic here.
So I wasn't necessarily paying attention. What's the question?
Oh, is there any current plans in the short term or even in the long term that you can discuss regarding being able to sort particle systems inside of the canvas layering order?
Right, so that's actually a more difficult question. It's on my mind and I'm trying to figure it out. Probably need to talk to that guy at some point about it. But yes, it's definitely something we want to be able to solve. It's just, I don't know the best way of doing it at this moment.
And you are UI, so you're probably going to be the one to answer this next question. Has there been any thought into doing less serialization of private variables, which would make it very hard to inherit from UI components in a clean way?
If you let me know which private variables you actually need access to.
Probably the best example is there's some serialized private variables in the text component.
Yeah, let me know which ones we need exposed, and I have no problem exposing them if there's a good use case for them. It's just, we started with private, and then we're slowly making things more protected and public.
Or you could even submit a PR.
What was that?
I said you could even submit a pull request on our repository, right? Yep.
Sure.
Code's out there, so.
Will do. And one last thing, you've added the particle trigger system. That's really useful if you are okay with including the entire physics system to be able to use it, it would seem. But what about just being able to more cleanly script particles behaviors?
Like script particle behaviors?
Yes, just continuous force kind of stuff. Like there's the wind system, but that doesn't seem to be very extensible.
So I know a guy who really wants to answer that question. It's a perfect task for your job system,
yes.
dude.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense to expose some hooks into the C# job system, I think.
But you can set all the positions of the particles today, no?
Yeah. You can do that, but it's just not very fast.
Yeah, it's kind of mashy.
Right, so
I mean,
so that kind of stuff is exactly the kind of stuff that the C# job system from that we showed in the keynote will make fly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. Wanted to ask if the terrain system will provide native means for paging, and if the terrain system provides the import of geospatial data.
All right. So, like I said, I mean the focus in the near term is really about vegetation and instancing and trees and so on. So we haven't really spent that much time thinking about what we do once that is solved.
And when is like that what you're saying that you're focusing on be available?
Let's see.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I mean, basically, the team, the first step that they did is they added instancing. So it's a train team that added the generic instancing into the mesh renderers and so on. So, I mean, I don't know. Sometime next year is my assumption.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hey, I wanted to say thank you as a Linux user. Thank you for the Linux editor and getting that out. It's still really hidden from the main site. There's not an obvious path to that. I know it's still kind of in a bunch of testing phases. But I wondered if someone could speak to where the Linux editor fits into the plans in the future.
I guess the honest answer is we don't know yet. There's quite some Linux enthusiasts in the company that went ahead and made sure that it all compiles and runs. It's really it really sort of depends on if we have a lot of customers asking for it. Obviously, you know, like it adds to the QA cost. So like there's all sorts of questions there. But is it working well for you?
Yeah, it's been great. I shipped a game as an indie dev this year, where we finished up the Linux testing from Linux builds. And in terms of my day job, we're also thinking about like AWS and using our AWS resources to build things. So it'd be nice to work from an Ubuntu stack there.
Right, gotcha. No, so we're thinking about it, but we're like, I'm not gonna, we don't know yet is the best answer I have right now.
All right, great, thank you.
So you didn't really mention anything about the UI system. Are there any upcoming things we should know about? Perhaps unifying the 2D and UI systems?
Philip?
Yeah, so with the UI system, the biggest thing we have coming is a profiler window to help you have an insight into what we're actually doing on the native side. Past that, we're going to get into like styles and layout and kind of rework those systems and actually implement one of those systems. As for 2D and UI convergence, yeah, it's a more difficult topic. It needs to be done. It's just how do we unify our renderers, our backends, our shaders. Definitely on the thought process, though.
So we can take one more question before they start slowly kicking us out, but we'll stick around and make sure we get to everyone's question before we go.
Okay, so I have audio questions. Is there a plan for Unity to support multi-channel I/O for audio? So like for third-party spatialization engines to be able to do ambisonics?
Does anyone know that? Yeah?
Only that that came
It's
up.
being
Can you stand up?
Sure. So I'm Dominique from the AV team, by the way. Dominique Leroux, not this Dominique. So yeah, ambisonic is being researched on actively by the audio side of the AV team. So no promises, but it's being hacked on regularly. So you can expect to hear from us in the following months.
Also, what about support for GPUs for audio? Right now, if we want to do it, we have to write our own implementation, but just like Unity handles unified graphics for GPUs, what about for audio?
Yeah, that I have no information about. I can relay the question to the appropriate team, but that's the best I can do.
Thanks.
We can
Hey,
have a
thanks
chat
everyone.
separately.
Thanks everyone for hanging out with us this morning. I hope you enjoyed the session.